Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name's Alex, and today I'm going to be showing you how to animate your button inside Webflow. Let's get right into it. So one of the main issues in Webflow is that our button functionality is kind of limited. This actual button element, you can't really style it in a lot of different ways. You can't really add interactions to it, animations to it. All you can really do is change the background color, the font, and maybe round the corners a little bit. That's it. So today, I want to take your button styling to the next level. So today, we're going to be building out this very interesting button right here, where when I hover, it fills in on a little slide animation, and when I take it off, it goes away. And it's very nice and beautiful. Once I show you the basics of this button, you can kind of take the lessons and tweak your button as you need. You don't have to build this button exactly, but this is the basis for all good Webflow button animation. So let's get into it. All right, so we come into Webflow, and step one is just drop in a form block into your page. And I'm just gonna clean mine up. I just wanna keep it very simple. All I have is an email address form or text field, and then a button that will submit that form when I'm ready. Okay, I'm gonna give my submit button a class. And that's it for step one. All right, so now step two is we need to add a div that's gonna serve as the styling element of our button. So let's do that now. So I'll choose my form and I'll drop in another div. I'm gonna name this button wrapper playground. Okay, it's gonna be our wrapper. I'm going to drag my button, the button that came with the form, into this wrapper like this. So now our button is inside our div block. Then I'm going to choose our wrapper. I'm going to come down here and give it, I'm just going to lock the height at 40 pixels. Okay. Then I want to, with our wrapper still selected, I want to change our position to relative. That way I can then change my button inside of my wrapper to absolute position and lock it inside of that wrapper and fill it 100%. So now my button is absolutely filled inside of my button wrapper div. That is key because now I can come to my button, make the background transparent, and essentially this wrapper div now serves as the styling almost facade over my button. Okay, my button's still there. I can still click it and submit my form. But the div wrapper that's now holding my button is going to serve as basically our canvas to style as we need. So for example, I can now grab my button wrapper that's holding our button. I can give it rounded corners. I can give it a white border. And we'll do 2 pixels just to make it a little clearer. So now it's starting to look nice. Again, our button is still there. We can still click our button, but the div is just making it look more beautiful. So this is the workaround. All right, next, I'm gonna grab my wrapper. The last thing I wanna do is I just wanna cut off the overflow. So I'm gonna come up here to overflow and just hit no. Okay, hidden. So basically all this is saying is if anything inside of a div button wrapper overflows outside of the boundaries, it'll just cut off. So it'll look very clean. Everything will be inside this beautiful button wrapper now. All right, the last thing I want to do before we get to step 3 is we want to add in one more div. Okay, and this I'm going to give it a class of div-slider playground. Now, why am I calling it div-slider? Well, if I go back to our target button, we can see we have this already, but when I hover, we have like this slider that fills up the button, which is very nice. Now, how do we do this? Well, we do the exact same thing. We take our div slider that we just added, position absolutely full inside of our button wrapper. Okay, so now our button wrapper is holding both a button and a div slider, both absolutely positioned inside of it. So it's all just held one on top of each other. Looks like one. Okay, so let's come to our div slider. Let's give it a little color just so we can see it. So I'm gonna come to backgrounds and I'm just gonna pick this cornflower blue. All right. So you can see we have our div slider now being held inside of our button wrapper, But the problem is we're sitting above our actual button, so you can't see the button text anymore. That's a problem because if we have a div block over our button, the button that came with our form, if we click it, it won't submit the form because you'll just be clicking the div on top of it. So what we need to do is we need to come back to our div slider and we need to set our z index as -1. That way, the button, the actual button element that we've turned transparent and invisible is still clickable and we can still submit our form. All right. So that's that. That's step 2. Okay, so step 3 is we need to set up our interaction animation. It's not hard. Let me show you what we do. All right, so with our button wrapper selected, I'm going to come up to the lightning bolt here, interactions. I'm going to set up an element trigger of mouse hover. So when we hover, our interaction is triggered. I'm going to on hover, select an action, start an animation, and add a new animation. I'm going to call it hover in playground. And let's set it up. So we want to do a move transform animation. So we'll come in here and I'll change my target. I'll double click and change my target to div-slider playground. Then I'll add another one, another move. Same thing, change my target to div-slider playground. So all this is saying is when we hover on our button wrapper, move this element, div-slider playground class element. Okay. Now, what do we want to do? Well, we're going to go back up to our initial and we're going to set this as initial state. Okay. So when we load the page, our initial state, this is where our div slider is going to be. Where's it going to be? Well, we can tell it where it wants to be. So we can move it left to right here. So I'm just going to set it all the way up to the left, maybe at -250 pixels. Okay. And that's our initial state. So when we load onto the page, that slider is way off to the left. Now remember, our wrapper we set as overflow hidden. So you're not going to see this element outside of the bounds of that beautiful button wrapper that we set earlier. That's why we set it as hidden. So come back here. So now we set where we want our slider to end up. Well, we want it to end up right back in the middle, right back at 0 pixels. That's where we want it to end up, right there. So at the beginning, we want it off to the left, but after we hover, after half a second, we want it right back where it was at 0 pixels. So we'll hit save. We're going to loop this animation just because every time we hover, we want it to happen. We don't want it to just happen once. We're going to come and do basically the same thing on hover out, just a little backwards. So on hover out, start an animation, start a new one. Hover out playground, I'll call it. And basically the same thing. So move, change the target to our slider. And move, change the target to our slider. Again, when we hover on a wrapper, affect our slider class. This one's a little different. We want to make sure that we're affecting all elements of this class. And we're going to start at 0 pixels this time because we hover, it moves to 0 pixels. When we hover off, well, it's going to be at 0 and then we move it. So it's just a little inverted. And then come down here after half a second. We want to move our slider back out to the left. Okay, so back out to -250 pixels. Okay, we'll hit save. And we should be okay now. Just like that. Let's publish and see how it looks. Okay, so we'll come in here. It looks nice. We'll hover and it fills. We unhover and it goes away. So that's looking really good. Now let's just make sure that our form actually submits here. Remember, we wanted to mess with the Z index a little bit just to make sure our button could actually be hit and it wasn't being covered by our slider. So let me type in an email and hit submit. And perfect, it's been received. So it's working great. So anyways, I hope you guys found great value in this video. If you like this video, go down and smash that like button. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more content like this, please consider subscribing. I really appreciate that as well. Ask me any questions you have in the comments, and I will see you guys next week. Thank you so much. Peace.